All right, so I think we'll get started. So this week, the Fire Center is excited to host an international visitor from Europe. I met Núria at a conference last year, and she had approached me just because she was interested in some of the research we were doing in Tasmania. And it actually ended up being really fortunate because Dave and I did a trip to Spain in November, and Núria just ended up being the best contact ever to have because she connected us with so many researchers there who just took us all around the Iberian Peninsula, and we saw some really interesting things. And we also went to this conference that was hosted, or it was this meeting hosted by the foundation for which she works, called the Pau Costa Foundation. And it became obvious how well connected this organization was, and that they had gotten some of the best, like the most well-known practitioners from around Europe in the same room with a lot of academics, which got Dave and I thinking that this is really what we're trying to do with this nascent fire center, is really find a way to, in a meaningful way, bring together practitioners and end users. So Núria emailed me a few months ago mentioning she was coming to Tasmania, and I think, oh, it would be a great opportunity for you to come and give a seminar for this this new center we're trying to set up. And Núria also happens to be a peat fire ecologist, so I thought, well, those are two perfect kind of things for Tasmania. So she's going to come today and talk to you about two separate but very important things involving end user communities and peat fire. So I'll just hand it over to you.
All right, well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure, and thanks for these introductions. It's really cool. So what I'm going to be talk is about these two very different topics. So if I could suggest maybe we talk about the end-user community engagement approaches, and if you have some questions, we talk about that, and then maybe we continue to the peat fire ecology, just because it's so different topics to talk about that probably needs just to separate them a little bit. So basically, what I'm going to talk first about is about the user engagement approaches we use. So I'm going to try to be answering these three questions. What are the challenges? How does Pau Costa Foundation address that challenges? And what can we do to improve the fire management engagement in research, development, and innovation? So basically, the challenges, and I'm focusing in Europe for that, and in that particular picture you see in the Mediterranean Europe. In short, we went for this more than 100 years ago to this. This is a photo of the same spot. 100 years of difference. Basically, we had a very intense agricultural management. We had forest management. The forest was used as a resource provider, so people was living with the forest and from the forest and was keeping the forest managed. There were lots of rural communities. But then, between these two periods, we had rural abandonment due to people moving from the rural communities, moving to the cities to work in all the industries. And then, during a long period of time, we had little forest management with a lot of consequences with the fuel loading. And now, in the last 20 years, we have people from urban areas moving back to the forest, living in wild and urban interface, and actually knowing little about traditional management practices. So this is in short, but in the fire management sector in Europe, we use the concept of wildfire generations to explain a little bit the history of that fires and the different challenges that we face. So basically, after this initial rural abandonment, we got the first generation of wildfires. Is there a pointer or something I can use? No. It's okay. Yeah, it's okay. Where is that? Sorry. No, I don't think I'll. Okay. Okay, if it's totally necessary, I will use it. So we got the first generation of wildfires, the one you see in the top, in the center, which were fires that spread over the fuel that was starting to build up. From a management perspective, these fires were controlled and suppressed using traditional fire breaks and having hand crews working in there. But then the fuel was continued to build up, and we got more intense wildfires. This is the second generation of wildfires. So these fires were more intense, and then the emergency services got technology. They got planes to actually stop that fires, and was somehow efficient as well. But then we got the third generation of wildfire as a consequence of the fuel building up after 20 years or so. And these fires were intense, they were fast, and they were creating spotting. So we're stressing the emergency management systems, and were very difficult to tackle. Fire services then started to realize that planes and fire breaks were not enough, and we needed actually to understand the landscape, the patterns, the fire history, and analyze all that. And in more recent years, we got the fourth, fifth, and sixth generation. So fourth generation is when those intense, fast fires, they also spread into wild and urban interface. So the fire is not an ecological problem only anymore, but it's actually a very strong social problem. And then when we got many of those wildfires, we got the fifth generation of wildfires. So these types of fires affecting wild and urban interface, very fast, very intense, but in several places at the same time. This really stresses the response system, and there are not enough resources to actually deal with all of that. And finally, there are the sixth generation of wildfires, these extreme wildfires, the mega fires, some people call them. They are totally out of the capacity of control. They create a lot of uncertainties for the emergency management services, and also there is little knowledge. So the research community is really looking to get more knowledge and more data to actually understand those fires and be able to give a proper response to that. So what happens in Europe is that, well, since this rural abandonment is getting greener, we also have climate change impacting. This means regions that did have a little fire history or certain types of fire regimes now are having more, well, they are progressively more affected by warmer temperatures, drought, and exposure to wildfires of higher intensity. And then we have, of course, a very dense continent, and there's a lot of population living in there. So the Mediterranean area where I live, we are now dealing with the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth generation of wildfires, meaning that fires are very intense. There is a lot of fuel. There is a wild and urban interface, most all the time being affected by those fires. We have simultaneity of fire events, and we have had recently Portugal 2017's mega fires of that category. So the whole European system is very stressed because of that, the whole civil protection capacity. But then we add that in recent years, we also have fires in Northern Europe of the first, second, and third generation, which means that the wildfire problem is actually stressing the whole system from a management perspective. And well, I guess I'm not saying anything new to you, because this is a global problem that many of the regions from the world, Australia as well, is facing. And I'm just, well, quoting here some things that Richard Thornton said, but this is something that probably you've heard in many places, and you already know that increasingly difficult climate condition demands more research to help making decisions during complex and overlapping emergencies, and this is to minimize major catastrophes from happening in the future. So basically, a way we want to solve that, we want to approach that from the foundation, is to build solid collaborations between all the actors. And sometimes we just think between research and management, but actually this is, there are more actors in that network that should be included in all that. And basically what we want is to have a policy that supports these relations, that actually helps these collaborations from happening, and policy that supports integrated fire management strategies. So, well, organizations like the Pau Costa Foundation are, which I'm going to explain just a little bit now what we do, we are working to push all the policy and all the actors to work for these purposes. So I'm going to explain briefly what the Pau Costa Foundation is. It's a private and non-for-profit foundation that was created in 2011, so it's quite young, by 60 founders, not just by one single person. And we describe us as a contact point to facilitate the exchange of knowledge, of wildfire knowledge. And we started working with users from Europe and the Mediterranean area, but rapidly we expanded our actions to all Europe and other parts of the world. So currently we have a community of members, which we work with them very often. Around 260 people are part of this community, but then the network, it's much larger, probably around 4,000 people. And I'm part of these 10 staff that are working with the foundation, but again, most of the actions, what we do is we facilitate that the members of the community actually get involved in all that. So basically we facilitate this engagement. So here in the bottom you see some numbers. We have trained professionals, fire management, around 1,200 professionals. We create lots of communication contents, which some of them are getting more and more popular. Some have more than 4 million visits. And then we also create workshops for risk awareness with adults and also with children. We work with children in many types of different actions. So we split, or we have these different areas. We foster actions to exchange knowledge, so we bring people from Spain to South America to exchange how the last fire seasons have been, to interact, to learn from each other, things that they are not going to see in their country unless the moment there is a tragic wildfire event. And we use these opportunities to exchange people and to get them to know how fires are behaving in other parts of the world. We also participate in research, development, and innovation projects. We participate in some projects that are to build resilient landscape with the local communities. We have some risk awareness and dissemination actions, outreach and participation. We organize conferences and seminars. And we have one part of social action, so to bring knowledge and resources to areas that are in need due to a certain situation that they have. So basically what I'm going to do now is summarize the lessons learned on fire management engagement in research, development, and innovation from the actions that we are doing in the foundation. And I'm also going to add to that the results from a survey, an online survey we did during February and March, where we asked a few questions on that engagement. And I think we had 230 plus responses on that. 63% of them were people that work in the management sector. Not 24% academia, and then there were industry, what I call intermix, which would be people that work in different sectors at the same time, and other. But I want especially to focus on this 63% of managers that were involved in the results of the survey. I may have to something. So one of the lessons learned and the area we work is to involve the end users in research, development, and innovation project. So there is this concept, the co-production, which means that working together in research, development, and innovation is important and is key to efficient outputs. And basically, I'm using this graph to show where the kind of research, development, and innovation that the foundation is participating in is encouraging. So basically, we have basic research, applied research, and user-inspired research, depending on how the engagement of the end users are. And basically, the foundation focuses in this area that is now highlighted in pink red, which is end users need to be really involved, medium or high, as you see on the vertical axis. And we work a little bit with applied research, but that creates applied knowledge, as you see in the horizontal axis, but especially with research that focuses on developing and weighing alternatives, formulating decisions, and implementing those decisions. So we are not that much interested in that research that is just, it's targeting other researchers. We are really interested in the research that's having a real applicability. So some of the lessons learned we have for that is that knowledge from managers is key to develop research development and innovation that is applicable for real life problems. I guess no one doubts about this need. But we found in the survey that fire management engagement in this project is currently not enough. I think only in a 75% of the researchers that replied to the survey, they say that users are involved maybe in 50% of the projects they are creating, or even less than 20% of the project. So it's, even though we know that we need users to face real life problems, the engagement is really very low. And but then contrast with the opinion of the managers, which 91% of the people who answered that survey thinks that it's really important to include the management experience and lessons learned in research, development, and innovation. So managers really want to be part of that because they think it's necessary to create things that are applicable. This doesn't mean involve the end users in the validation part of the project, but right from the beginning, since the design phase, they need to understand what the project will be about and be able to introduce in their experiences and what they can bring from management. And well, basically another key point is to work in transdisciplinary teams. I guess you all approached that already. So something else that it's another lesson learned and something that we are working is to use the end users, the fire management, as data providers. If we think that these people is basically out there in the field doing prescribed burns, managing many incidents, nowadays it's easy for them to collect some types of data during those events, and they are really keen in some regions, and we help them to actually be able to collect this data. So researchers that say, and as a researcher I can tell, it takes a long time to collect data. Well, actually, it takes a lot of time, but we have resources there in the field that can be used, and we need to use those. And then to exchange the global knowledge and data. As we said before, mega fires may happen once or twice a year in different places of the world. So we need to share that data globally as a community to be able to create these data sets that we need to use. And we are pushing the different communities around the world to actually participate in this global data collection. Another important point is to have impact on the territory. So it's not just only involving researchers and managers, but also the communities and getting them all working together. So we are working to develop sustainable models that involve those communities. And for instance, one of the projects we are working on is to grazing in strategic management areas that are defined by fire experts and researchers as being key strategic points that need management to either give opportunities to the fire suppression system or to reduce the risk of those communities. So the experts identified some areas, as you see in the picture, that need to be tackled. This is where fire management should be to create opportunities for suppression. And then we get the communities and we get the researchers to work in what are the best practices to manage all these lands. And in particular, I'm going to show now a video of that project.
By doing this, they are part of the Fireflux project in Girona, northern Spain. Sergi Nuss runs the Fireflux project.
They eat what is the fuel for fire. When they eat what's fresh, either from the grass or from the leaves of young trees or bushes. Therefore, they stop and they break the vertical continuity of vegetation between the grassland, the bush, and the tree dogs, which is the most relevant factor for large forest fires.
In intense fires, there is little the fire service can do to stop the spread of a fire. So the fire service in Girona looked at ways to prevent fires spiralling out of control. Shepherds like Judith are key to the project.
I became a shepherd because I wanted to do something for the environment in our area. And one of the reasons, it was because the fire was recurrent in this area every year, mainly during the summer.
But the Fireflux project can only work if the shepherds can make a living.
The shepherd job is disappearing. One of it is the commercial part, that the meat is not really appreciated or is not being paid as it must be. Another part is that it's not a really simple life. You have to be outside during the winter, during the summer, all the time, and the animals must be fed all the time.
The Fireflux project is trying to help shepherds by encouraging butchers to sell goat products. Using the Fireflux brand.
We like it. Fireflux. I look at Fireflux. We explain our customers the campaign and the project, and they are really happy to know that this campaign of Fireflux exists. All know the danger of the fire, and all are involved once upon a time in a fire.
Yeah, so basically creating sustainable models, not just bringing prototypes or things into practice, but making them. And maybe the next one. Making them really happen. So what we also do is to train shepherds on fire ecology and landscape management, so this thing can be replicated. And we also bring researchers and fire practitioners and communities in projects that aim to democratizing wildfire strategies through participatory processes. So taking collective decisions on how we're going to manage the environment of our communities. So other things we do is to create networking spaces, and this is what a recent one we organized that Jamie was referring. Was the Forum on Catalan Wildfire Research. We created that with the purpose not to show the results of research, but what everyone was doing to identify the current needs and challenges for management. There were the fire managers in there to explain what were the needs of the territory and how scared or afraid they are of what's coming in the Mediterranean region, and then and beyond, also in Northern Europe, and we had different people talking about different regions and the problems that are there, and then to discuss about what every research group was doing in research to identify the gaps and opportunities for collaborations. So in the survey, we asked the participants about how they feel about the different networking spaces. You see there's, in the horizontal axis, different types of events. So international conferences, national conferences, practitioner-oriented workshops, regional events with all the different actors that are those events that bring theory into practice. And then organization of exchanges and visits to other countries. So we asked them, what's your level of interest in participating in those things? And the two columns here mainly are for all participants of the survey, and which are the yellow, and the green ones are just for the managers who participated in the survey. So the high percentage of all the columns means that they are all good networking spaces, but if they were to choose some of them, they would choose practitioner-oriented workshops on regional events where theory goes into practice. So these are the spaces where they think the knowledge should be shared and the collaboration should raise. Maybe the ones that are less important here are international conferences that researchers will love to participate, but actually compared to the others, it's one of the one that had less level of interest. And then the exchanges and visit to other countries, which was something surprisingly. Basically, it's interesting to have collaborations in the area and that you are working on, and with the different actors to make a difference, a real difference in the territory. I did the same. Okay, I'm not gonna get close. So we also asked them how they feel, what's the level of interest on the different ways of sharing the outputs. So we asked them about scientific papers, we asked them about practitioner and management-oriented journals, research development and innovation project reports, online and offline databases, other types of video materials, and then Lessons on Fire, which is a practitioner-oriented platform that we use. But the idea is all the resources practitioners can need, they can have all the resources in that same platform. So it's basically a platform to provide them with information that's interesting for them. So basically, I guess you expected the interest in scientific papers to be very low from a management point of view, but actually it's interesting to see that the project reports are the ones that are less popular. And this is something that we will need to think about, because we spend lots of time in producing project reports for every project, for everything. And actually they are, it's something that it's really not interesting, at least from management perspective. The ones that are in a higher, better valued for managers are basically the practitioner and management-oriented journals. So it's interesting that the research somehow goes, or the outputs of the projects goes into that. And then to have these outcomes in platforms that are prepared for managers directly. That's important to disseminate the knowledge and get collaborations from there. We also ask in the survey about the perception. So what topics do you think that are better covered by research, development and innovation, all the range? So in the orange one are the ones that are currently funded. So how everyone who answered the survey thinks that research development and innovation funds are currently focused. And we see that fire safety and new technologies are probably the ones that are having, are perceived as getting all the investments. And then we also ask, what do you think it's needed for the perception side? And we saw that, for instance, fire ecology and more research, development, and innovation in fire ecology, in fire effects, in prevention. This would be something that are perceived to actually be needed. So the ones that are working in this field, good, because we need to work to get more things, or at least make the research that is done in that field more visible, because it's not perceived to be enough. So that's it from that part. I'm just going to explain this slide. I'm here because I'm participating in a project that's called GeoSafe. GeoSafe aims at developing geospatial-based environment for optimization systems to address fire emergencies. And GeoSafe, it's basically a framework for networking between Europe and Australia for researchers and practitioners. So it's one example of one of these projects that is really interested to get exchanges between the different actors going. And it happened to have the final conference in Melbourne this November. So if you are interested in any of the topics that are listed below, in solutions that can work for fire risk mapping, methods for bushfire prevention and mitigation, first response and initial attack evacuation, tools for emergency management, and innovative solutions for firefighters, you're very welcome to join the GeoSafe conference. So that's all for this part. Maybe if we're going to the fire ecology, Peatland fire ecology part, if you have any question or you want any comment or anything about all this community engagement, maybe we can discuss that now. Otherwise, I'll move on to the second part. All right. So now I'm going to change the topic completely, change the scale completely, and talk about peat fire ecology and behavior in temperate peatlands. So now we are working in a peatland scale. So I will try to answer these three questions. Where do peat fires occur in Europe? How do peat conditions affect the peat fire spread? and what are the implications of peat fire research for fire management and the ways we approach that. So basically, in Europe, this type of fires occur in, everywhere that organic soils develop, which is the darker areas that you can see in that map. Basically, everywhere from Central and Northern Europe. But if we think that climate change is going to expose all these areas, Northern and Central European areas, to hotter temperatures and longer droughts, peat fires will for sure have will increase their impact. In recent years, we had peat fires in Scandinavian countries, in Finland, in Denmark, in the Atlantic area, in UK. Some cases are really well documented about these peat fires. In Ireland as well, this is where I worked for some years. We did document as well some peat fire cases in there. But not just in this northern area, peat fires or smoldering fires also happen in the south, in wetlands that are dry from some time. This is actually one of the fires that happened in Spain in 2009. The wetland was burned, the fire spread underneath, and it was burning there for weeks. It was very difficult to extinguish that. So the importance of peat fire research is mainly because it has these impacts that are listed there. Carbon emissions contribute to greenhouse gases. We know the impact of Eastern Asia. The smoke haze causes actually health impacts to the population. This has been reported for Russia, but also for different places. It has economic impacts. So we read here that haze crisis costs Indonesia almost 2% of the GDP. And there are ecological impacts at local scale for habitat loss. You know this case. But that will depend on the type of fire and the intensity of that fires, and basically the conditions of the peat and the ecosystem before the fire gets there. And then it has also implications for fire management that I'm going to talk later through an example. So how do peat conditions affect the peat fire spread? What I'm presenting here now is the result of some work we did when I was part of the ecological modeling group in University College Dublin. And we had some collaborations with the Wildfire lab and the Imperial Haze lab in the UK. We work on understanding peat fire dynamics, so very basic understanding, going down to the fundamental understanding of those peat fires. So the research question that we were interested is to know how does the moisture in the peat moisture content influences smoldering fire in peatlands. So we were not interested in how the spread would, we were looking specifically to the spread of the fire, not how it was ignited. We knew that there was some work done about that in the past. We were interested in knowing once the fire is ignited, because peat can sustain smoldering, so how does that happen? And we didn't focus on, we focused on the horizontal spread, because this is how fires can spread and reignite and create new spotting and become a hazard. So, and then they create these post-fire landscapes. We were interested to understand how the smoldering fire patterns were creating this type of impacts in the ecosystem. So first of all, we look at how the moisture content was distributed in the surface of the peat layers. These are the Wicklow Mountains in Ireland, and basically we're interested in knowing how fast moisture content can change. If it has an influence on smoldering, how fast is that changing in the ecosystem? And basically what we found is that moisture can change according to the vegetation patterns. So we found that dry areas of a very local scale can be very dry in lawns and hammocks of feather moss, but then rapidly when you have a hammock or a hammock of sphagnum or something like that would rapidly change. And basically we did some interpolation. So how is moisture content changing in this fine scale? And we actually looked, if you see the scale of this interpolation map, it's just in centimeters. So it's 1.5 meter per 1.5 meter. And we find that moisture content was very variable even at that scale. Basically, the red colors are peats that could ignite and potentially sustain smoldering, and the blue colors are the ones that are likely to be ignite. But what we were interested is in defining how the gradient of this moisture content, how fast it can change. Basically, we find that in that type of ecosystems, dry patches could have between 30 or 50 centimeters, and then they would sharply and fastly change the moisture content they could rapidly change the moisture content and become not likely to burn. So this was the base of the experimental studies with it with the peat. So basically we're looking at the dynamics and how these smoldering fires behave in control environments. And we set up different experiments to look at this fire spread. So you can see a photo of one of the samples that we burned, and we had infrared cameras looking at them all the time after the fire was ignited, and we have different temperature sensors and scales to measure how everything was changing during the burn. And then what we did is to modify the conditions of the peat in a very controlled way, to modify its bulk density, its moisture content, to know how this was affecting the spread of the fires. This was a video where you could see one of the experiments and the data that's collected from those experiments, but does not work. So I will not be able to show that. But basically, to summarize, is that with all the infrared image analysis, what we were able to pull is the position of the fire for every pixel of that burn, let's say. So we could get the spread rates and analyze that. And one of the things we found is we were looking at is the effect of the peat conditions on the probability of self-sustainable spread. And basically that depends, we found that this depends on both the moisture content and the bulk density of the peat. The more moisture content we have in one soil, the more energy will be needed from the fire to actually dry that moisture before spreading. And in peats, this is mainly done by conductivity, so there is not radiation or other types of energy involved. And the bulk density, the higher the bulk density, the lower the oxygen available in that peat mass. So this means there was less oxygen diffusion, and with less oxygen, the fire would spread slower or even extinguish. So this is one example. I see something appear, probably that's because the publication or what we did now, the PDF. But yeah, basically just focus in the central area, the one graph you see, probably. It's showing the expected peat fraction consumed from the ignition area. So each color is one distance from the ignition. So the yellow, I think it's 6 centimeters. The green would be 8 centimeters from the ignition point, and the blue would be 8, and the other ones would be more. So given these moisture content conditions that you see up there, this is using gravimetric moisture content conditions. It's not volumetric. That's why it can go above 100%. This is for peats that had 200% moisture content, so quite moist. And what you would see in the axis is the different bulk densities of the peat. So what we found is that for that given moisture content, the probability, the expected fraction of peat could get reduced. So in fact, for these conditions, for 200% moisture content, the fire wouldn't be able to spread farther than 6 centimeters from the ignition point. So basically will not succeed to self-sustained spread. And then we also measured the effect of these peat conditions on the spread rates. We found spread rates that were between 2 centimeters per hour and 8 centimeters per hour. So basically to burn a table like that, this length of peat could take hours, days even. It depends on the condition. So it's really slow, the smoldering spread. And then we could see that the effect of the peat conditions on this spread, being the moisture content, the one that affect the most the conditions, but also being influenced by the bulk density and an interaction of those. We also found that had an effect on those. Yeah, I don't think we'll be able to see that part with the PDF. We also look at how a gradient of moisture content would affect the spread of the fire, and we created these experiments that had a region that were drier, followed by a peat region that was wetter, and we looked at the position of the smoldering front and how the fire transitioned from the dry peat to the wet peat and the energy that was radiated after that. And what we found, let's see. Yeah, so basically, with that results, our intention was to explain how landscapes, post-fire landscapes like that happen. So drier peat could burn, and how far into a wet peat the fire could spread before extinguishing. So what would be left, basically. And we estimated sort of models to actually calculate this spread distance. So basically, this is all we did during that period with the ecological modeling group, but both the Wildfire lab and the Imperial Haze lab, they are very active in these fundamental research studies. They are working from looking at the ignition, looking at the emissions, particle emissions, infrared detection for suppression as well, and a range of other different things. So if you're interested in that topics, it would be good to contact them. And finally, what are the implications of peat fire research for fire management? I'm going to explain that through a case study that we worked very recently in Spain. These were the Rocallaura fires, which were fires, were two fires. The first one is the blue perimeter. It was a fire that spread during June 2016, and the fire brigades suppressed that in an area that was that had peat soil, well, not peat soils, but organic soils in there. So after 1 month, they had to go back there because the fire reignited, and they had another fire, a second fire, that actually spread more intense in the territory during a day that was really hot and dry, and that the emergency service were being busy in other areas. So actually this second fire, which is the green one, ended up impacting in a wild and urban interface. So the fire service came to us and to the University of Barcelona because they are used to have reignitions during several days or weeks after fires, but that particular case created a situation that was very uncomfortable for everyone. To allocate resources means to allocate resources after the fire to control this smoke going out from soils all the time. It's to put a lot of people working in there, so spending resources, and besides they don't have that much resources to allocate when the second fire happens. So it's something that they really want to know more about. So you see the different photos of the different places. Here is where the fire burned quite severely in that area over there, but then the fire was suppressed in this area up here, which was an area that was rich in organic soils. And we found out patterns of smoldering combustion when we were looking at the effects of that fire. Here you can see the several reignitions that happened there. So basically, several reignitions until the very last fire happened and spread towards this wild and urban interface. But during all that time, the fire brigades documented reignitions, and this means spending resources and allocating people in there. So fire management is really interested in knowing how to avoid that from happening. So what we did is we characterized the organic soils, and we used the models that are already developed for temperate and boreal peatlands to predict some of the variables of that potential smoldering spread. And we estimated ignition probabilities for the soils that were in that area, for different type of, for the properties of that soils. We estimated the capacity to sustain smoldering and the percentage of consumption of the surface layers, the DAF layers, and we also estimated spread rates. But basically, we came across to the how the moisture content should increase to actually avoid fire spread in those areas, which it's something that it can be done after days and weeks of conducting studies and models and so on. But what we are interested in is in the how we can get this data out during the fire management or during that month that the several reignitions were happening there. So, so we quantified how much water would be needed according to the models to actually suppress that fire. We proposed other actions to increase the bulk density around those areas that were identified to have smoke coming up. But basically what was key for us is to introduce all the peat fire behavior into the strategic planning or all the part that's dealing with fire management, planning, and suppression, basically. All the models physical models that are used for fire spread may not be considering all that part, and it is important to have that in there. Basically, this was for to discuss with the fire services, but then there are other potential applications also for landscape management, peatland management, which is that not all peat fires are bad for the ecosystems. in fact, if the heterogeneity is high and the diversity of the different vegetation species is high, probably we won't get pits burning 1 meter deep. They will probably burn the surface layer, and if that happens, it actually, as fire in every ecosystem, it will contribute to renew the ecosystem and help mosses to spread. So basically, this is what we did, and that's all I have for today. Thank you very much.